Hi, in this video we are going to write a response to an academic task 1 question that was seen on the 14th of January 2017. If you are looking for more tutorial videos like this one, you can visit my blog at IELTS.com, and I'm still running the IELTSnetwork.com, which is free to join, and you can have free feedback on your speaking and your writing there. The question that was seen looked something like this. I received a message from someone, from several people actually, reporting that they saw this question on their exam, and I had someone produce something that I think is probably quite similar to what was seen. So we're dealing with 3 pie charts here, and the task description reads, "The pie charts below give information about what young people in Australia did after leaving secondary school in 1980, 1990, and 2000. Summarize the information for university lecturer. Make comparisons where relevant." So I'll just give you a few seconds to look at the source and the varying bits of data. Okay, so all 3 pie charts present the same demographics. So people that went on to become employed after secondary school, people that pursued further education, and people that were unemployed. And so we can see that so the employed section, which is this whiter section in these pie charts, went from 40% to 50% and then to 55%. So it was a growth that sort of decelerated as it progressed over the 20 years in question. People that pursued further education, they went the opposite direction, so 50% to 38%, and then more modestly to 37%. And the unemployed figures were 10%, climbing to 12%, and then dropping to 8%. So we see 3 different growth patterns. One is increasing, one is decreasing, and one is a bit more varied. And so we'd obviously want to use comparative language to make this clear in our response. So a couple of points that I want to make before we get started. Firstly, there isn't much data to work with here. So it might be a bit of a struggle actually to hit 150 words or beyond, because if you were just describing the 3 trends that are present here, you could do all of that, that in 3 sentences more or less, and then just tack on a 4th sentence as sort of like the introduction to it, and be finished. But of course that wouldn't put you at 150 plus words. So we're going to have to work a little bit with the language in this response to make sure that we are producing a response that is the required length. The other thing to remember is that so the wording is important because it says young people in Australia did after leaving secondary school. So in the response, we can't say things like the graduates or the people that finished secondary school, because we don't, we're not sure what the status is of these people. They've left secondary school, perhaps they've dropped out of school, perhaps they graduated. So the language has to be a bit more focused when we make reference to these people to make sure that we're in line with what the question is telling us. And as I was saying, that we want to use comparative language, so we're going to summarize this, and then the response makes clear that we're supposed to be comparing the different bits of data. So we're going to do that in 2 different ways. We're going to compare the different percentages, or the different shares of these 3 pie charts, and then we're also going to compare the trends, okay, that the 3 different demographics within the pie charts produce. Okay, so make note to look for the different bits of comparative language that you see. Okay, so in this response, we're going to start with an introduction paragraph to kind of frame how we're going to approach the response. And I'm actually going to describe everything in one large analyzing paragraph. You could separate the items into separate paragraphs if you want to, but because the trends are so straightforward, we won't be needing to do anything that complicated. So I'm just going to put it all into one larger paragraph. So we'd start the response something like this, just giving some a bit of an overview of what we're looking at. So the three pie charts communicate the status of young people in Australia after leaving secondary school for the years 1980, 1990, and 2000. The three pie charts communicate the status of young people in Australia after leaving secondary school for the years 1980, 1990, and 2000. And actually, I have the data source in front of me on my desk here, so I'm just going to move this to a new page just to keep everything nice and organized. We want to share that we're going to be looking at the broad trends and the more minor and minute trends in our response. So we'd write something like overarching trends between these 3 points in time can be seen when the pie charts are compared. Okay. Okay, so now let's talk about the rates of employment. So as I was mentioning in the opening of the video, this is a growth that's seen. So it goes from 40% to 50% to 55%. There's no need to separate each of these figures into their own sentences. We can, it's kind of a linear progression, so we can describe this in one sentence. So let's do that. Rates of employment among post-secondary young people. So again, being very careful with the language. They're post-secondary, but we're not mentioning whether they're graduates or not, because we don't know. In Australia, rose from 40% in 1986 to not 86 in 1980 to 50% in 1990, and then we can say before swelling further to 55% in or by 2000. I'm going to change this to by. Okay. So rates of employment among post-secondary young people in Australia rose from 40% in 1980 to 50% by 1990, before swelling further to 55% by 2000. And I mean, if you were really trying to push the word limit up, you could describe the trend that's seen. So you could say it was a trend that decelerated. You could probably stick that in here somewhere. But I mean, sharing the figures like that, it's kind of clear that that's what's going on. A less substantial shift in weighting was seen among, let's change this to occurred among young people in Australia who sought further education after completing their secondary studies. So, and I think that this is a fair assumption that they would have completed their secondary studies to pursue further education. But that that's not the case for the other two categories. We wouldn't know. Okay, so that's kind of like the minor trend that's going on. The young people who are looking for additional education, it is it's a similar trend. It's just moving in the opposite direction, but it is consistently decreasing. So let's share these specific values. So let's make reference to them as this demographic. Made up %, of the total in 1980, but fell to 38% by 1990, and further to 37% by 2000. Okay, so by comparison, now we can move into talking about those that are unemployed, and just make reference to the growth pattern in this is different because it's not linear. It doesn't just move up or just move down. So we could use that to help fulfill the requirement for comparative language. So by comparison, young people in Australia identifying as or that could be identified as unemployed followed a growth pattern that was more varied, making up, let's say, 10% of the total in 1980, 12% in 1990, and 8% in 2000. Okay, so I'm just going to read the paragraph again to make sure we're flowing between sentences well. Rates of employment among post-secondary young people in Australia rose from 40% in 1980 to 50% by 1990, before swelling further to 55% by 2000. A less substantial shift in weighting occurred among young people in Australia who sought further education after completing their secondary studies. This demographic made up 50% of the total in 1980, but fell to 38% by 1990 and further to 37% by 2000. Okay, you could even stick in modestly somewhere in here just to show that, I mean, the drop from 50 to 38, that's quite major, a drop in 12%, but then the 10 years following to 2000, the drop was only 1%. So quite modest. But anyway, by comparison, young people in Australia that could be identified as unemployed followed a growth pattern that was more varied. Okay, so again, using comparative language here, making up, and then notice the comma, please, making up 10% of the total in 1980, 12% in 1990, and 8% in 2000. Okay, and then we could just tack on that. These growth patterns are something that we might expect to carry on. Not indefinitely, but perhaps just beyond the year 2000. So it is likely these three differing growth patterns carried on in similar fashion beyond the year 2000. Okay. So we've very specifically described the three pie charts. I might, like I was saying, you could add in a sentence to describe the growth style of people that were employed. So I might just do that just to demonstrate to you here. So rates of employment among post-secondary young people in Australia. We could say decelerated. Let's just say here rising rates decelerated over the 20 years in question. Let's just say so. This. Sorry, I'm doing lots of editing here, but you might need to do that when you read through your response in the exam room. So the rising rate of employment among post-secondary young people in Australia decelerated over 20 years in question. This trend, this share, we'll say, So this share rose from 40% in 1980 to 50% by 1990 before swelling further to 55% by 2000. Okay, so anyway, just an idea, if you ever needed to beef up the word count, is to, you could commit one sentence to describing the trend that you see, and then another sentence to kind of getting into more of the very specific, minute details that make up the trend. Right, because as I was saying, I mean, this source, there's really not that much information that you need to communicate. So, putting it into 150 plus words it can be a challenge. So let's read the response from the beginning. And so note the way that the different sentences connect together, the way that we are comparing not only the different shares that we see in the pie charts, but also the trends that that each different demographic of people produces. Okay, so the pie charts communicate the status of young people in Australia after leaving secondary school for the years 1980, 1990, and 2000. Overarching trends between these 3 points in time can be seen when the pie charts are compared. The rising rate of unemployment among post-secondary young people in Australia decelerated over the 20 years in question. This share rose from 40% in 1980 to 50% by 1990, before swelling further to 55% by 2000. Okay, and so just little connectors like when we talk about this share, well, what share are we talking about? We're referring to the rates that we were talking about in the previous sentence. A less substantial shift, so again, comparative language here, right? We're talking, we're comparing the next topic, which is people that went on to pursue further education, to those that went into employment. So a less substantial shift in weighting occurred among young people in Australia who sought further education after completing their secondary studies. This demographic made up, again, so connective language, this demographic made up 50% of the total in 1980, but fell to 38% by 1990 and further to 37% by 2000. By comparison, young people in Australia that could be identified as unemployed, I think I've already pointed this out, but by comparison, so young people in Australia that could be identified as unemployed followed a growth pattern that was more varied, making up 10% of the total in 1980, 12% in 1990, and 8% in 2000. It is likely these three differing growth patterns carried on in a similar fashion beyond the year 2000. And I'm sure that that will put us over 150 if I highlight this. So that's 173 words. That's about where you want to be. I mean, you don't want it to be too long because you're racing against the clock, but at the same time, you don't have much data to work with, and you got to beef up your response a little bit. So I hope that that demonstration was helpful. Please carry on sending me the questions that you see on your exam so that I can produce more videos like this one. And please leave a like and subscribe to my channel, and we'll hopefully see you at IELTSnetwork.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.